Welcome back, class. It is 1976. The film is called Taxi Driver. The director is a guy that we didn't know his name back then. Not really. People didn't know his name, but it's Scorsese. And the themes for this week are studio collapse and new directors emerge. Real quick before we do that, I forgot to tell you something last week. So if we look up here for review, last week we talked about shot sizes and personnel. In the personnel category, I forgot to tell you that assistant directors, all those things I said that they're responsible for, that plus one more thing, assistant directors are also responsible for background actors. That means like if you see a big scene and there's 200 people in the background, they have to do something or move, the director doesn't manage them, the assistant director manages them. So they do the background stuff as well. Okay, to Taxi Driver. This is a very, very interesting time in American cinema. We're moving backwards very rapidly, right? We went from, contemporary American, we kind of jumped, a big jump, to the 90s. We skipped the 80s. That's not because the 80s don't have a lot to say. It's just because we've only got 16 weeks. So in the 1970s, what sets the scene? What's the background? Why did things change? Why was it such a rich moment in American cinema? Well, basically it's because the studios almost died, right? So something new was born because the old thing totally died. And the reason this happened is because the studios completely lost touch with what people wanted to see. Now, of course, the PowerPoint kind of lays this out, but to think about it with a little more detail, consider for a second like what is going on through the 1960s. The baby boomers are primarily, they're all born after World War II, so by the late 60s, this is where they're transitioning from, late childhood into adulthood. It's a really critical moment in their development. And this is the moment when Hollywood can't figure out what they want anymore. Okay, so consider the 1960s. What happened then? Well, early 1960s. 1962 is the Cuban Missile Crisis. 63, John F. Kennedy is assassinated. 65, 34 people are killed in the Watts riot in LA. Martin Luther King is assassinated in 68. Bobby Kennedy is assassinated in 68 as well. First man on the moon in 69. Vietnam is raging by the late 1960s. By the late 1960s, we see the birth of the gay rights movement inspired by the civil rights movement. We see significant advances and a real emergence of the Hispanic and Chicano rights movements. And we see the second very strong wave of feminism. So if that's what's going on in the 60s, and that's a lot, right? We didn't even mention the Cold War. I mean, Vietnam's a reflection of it, but still. Now, what's Hollywood trying to make? Well, through the mid-1960s, Hollywood had a successful formula. It was kind of like big spectacle films like The Sound of Music, right? Big musicals. That would be one version. Classic westerns worked well. But by the late 60s, the youth audience in particular is not interested in that. So there's a couple examples of films made in 1969. This is a big year. The first Man on the Moon just happened, right? And Hollywood is still making films like Paint Your Wagon, a musical western, or Hello Dolly, 1969, also a musical western. That had a $25 million budget. That was a huge budget back then. And it was a bust. So Hollywood at this time simply loses touch with the audience. They're trying to compete with television, and they just lost their edge. The new directors come in not because the studios want them, it's because the studios are absolutely desperate and they have to try something. Now, a quick caveat, an aside to all that. In the contemporary narrative of American cinema, there's the notion that new directors break in and make a huge impression. If you think of the 70s, that is what's happening. You see all these new directors pop up. And their very specific sort of personal voices. That is not the normal pattern. That is actually abnormal. This is not something that's going to happen again. It hasn't happened since. This is a singular moment when the door broke open and all those new directors got in. Do not expect this pattern to occur again anytime soon. Okay, so Scorsese comes up in this sort of milieu at this time when the studios are collapsing. Who is he? Well, Scorsese went to NYU Film School. The film schools have been around for a long time by now. Right? Some of the film schools start in the 20s and 30s. Why do we suddenly see so many film school trained directors come into Hollywood in the 1970s? Again, it's the collapse, right? The system collapsed. Before that, the film schools aren't that important in terms of delivering new directors to the system. But by the 70s, they become important. So Scorsese is the kind of person who's grown up being sort of trained in film, formally and academically. He's been exposed to French film and tons of Italian film, Japanese film. And like the rest of his generation, he's strongly influenced by these things he's seeing coming from the rest of the world. One of the tools he picks up and he puts into his films is a thing called location shooting. So instead of what they would do at a studio in the 30s, which is shoot in a studio, right? This generation of directors favors shooting on locations in real places. And what does that do? It gives the film realism, additional realism. Now, realism is sort of a central theme in a lot of what's happening in the 70s with these directors. If you look at the violence in Taxi Driver, he really works hard. They work hard to make it's just very realistic. It's gruesome. And if you look at, say, a Western from the late 60s, the way that they do violence is completely unrealistic, right? So we see a significant transition in that respect coming through these directors and the way they handle different dimensions of the filmmaking process. So these new directors were learning in two places. They were learning at film schools, and then many of them got their practical work experience through one producer, a guy named Roger Corman. Roger Corman's been around forever. He's still working. He makes B movies, like low-budget, goofy horror films. Sharknado, that kind of stuff. What did a Roger Corman film look like in the 1950s? Here you go.
Break trail with 4 men and a girl to the territory of the killer beast. 4 men who live by killing. A girl who has experienced so much that only sadistic brutality can thrill her. Vicious and violent men, attempting the most daring of daylight robberies, enjoying midnight revelries, until one orgy turns into a nightmare of terror. Ride the ski lift to the very top in thrills.
What I saw you wouldn't believe.
Watch men who deal in death, meet and fight. The invincible beast from Haunted Cave.
Go back. Go back.
I come to help you.
You can't help now.
Mind blower, right? That's bad stuff. That is like the definition of bad. But it was a really important space for these new directors to. So all like Coppola, Scorsese, Ron Howard, Hellman, Cameron, John Sayles, they all got their first real practice making films, at least budgeted films, through Roger Corman. Okay, so to wrap all of that up, the 1970s are a super special time in American cinema. We see the emergence of the blockbuster. Now, we're not doing that right now. Next week, we're going to look at the big blockbuster that changed everything. But we see all of these new directors emerge, right? And what distinguishes them is that many of them are not coming from within Hollywood. They weren't trained by other directors in a studio. They're starting as outsiders at film schools. They're making corny films for Roger Corman. And then they break the door to get into Hollywood and make sort of visionary, personal, I don't want to say personal films, but they do have very like personal styles and personal feels in terms of the voice. Think of Woody Allen, right? A studio can't make a Woody Allen movie. Only Woody Allen can make a movie like that for a studio. Does that make sense? Okay, so how do these directors learn? We've got the schools, Roger Corman, and that's it. Okay, you guys, that's it for this week. Remember to do the form writing assignment, do the post-assessment questions. And a quick note, I spent the last week looking at your writing and grading your writing. A lot of it's, about 50% of you guys are doing fine, you look good. But there's a cross-section of this class that I'm very, very concerned about in terms of the quality and the thoughtfulness of the writing. I'm seeing basic grammar errors, basic spelling, I mean basic errors. You know, there's a space after a period. So the reason this concerns me is not so much for this class. This isn't a writing class. This is a film class. But anyone who's pursuing a degree in a college, presumably you're also you're pursuing some type of career that you want, some future that you dream of. That's fantastic. And one of your primary fundamental skills to get what you want from your life is going to be writing, whether you want to believe that or not. I can't think of a profession where you don't have to be able to write. So if you're having issues, there's a writing center at school. Take the comm classes, take the English classes, and improve your writing. This is a life skill, a fundamental life skill. If you write to a prospective employer 2 years from now, seeking employment, and there's basic grammar, basic punctuation, basic spelling errors, one, you probably won't get the job. Two, if you do, they're going to leverage you to work for cheap. That's how it works, right? You won't have any negotiating power because they'll say, well, you know, what else are you going to do? No one else is going to hire you. You see where I'm going? So this is a very important life skill. Please take it seriously. If and when you finish your degree 2 years, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, whatever it might be, if there is one thing, if you get nothing else, but you get one thing and it's writing skills, you have succeeded. All right? Take it seriously, please.